All right, you soggy bastards. Welcome back to the deep dive.
Back from our punishment, are we?
You bet your ass we are. And this time we're going to dive headfirst into the wonderful world of flood management.
Someone's got to do it right.
You've dumped a whole goddamn encyclopedia on my desk, so clearly you're not just morbidly curious about how we're all going to drown.
No one wants to wade through all that research.
Exactly. So let's cut the crap and rip the Band-Aid off. We're here to get down and dirty with all the fucked up shit we do to try and stop the planet from turning into one giant swimming pool.
We do like to make things complicated for ourselves, don't we?
We do. So
Yeah.
First things first. How the hell did these floods even happen? I get the whole rain and snow melt thing. But is there more to it?
Well, yeah, the clouds definitely have something to do with it, but you're right. There's a lot more to it than that. See, we humans have this amazing talent for fucking things up even more.
You mean like paving over everything and wondering where the water's supposed to go?
Exactly. We drain wetlands, pave over every goddamn inch of land, and then act all surprised when the water has nowhere to go but straight into our living rooms.
It's like we're actively trying to piss off Mother Nature and then whine when she throws a tantrum?
Pretty much. We disrupt the natural systems that are supposed to help control the water flow, and then bitch and moan when our basements get flooded. It's like chopping down a forest and then complaining about the lack of shade.
So basically we're a bunch of asshats who can't see the flood for the pavement.
You got it. But hey, at least we're trying to fix it.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of fixing it, let's talk about the whole blunting the peak thing. What the hell is that, anyway?
Well, you see, the worst floods happen when river levels spike really suddenly, like someone just slammed the gas pedal on a runaway truck.
Okay, I'm picturing a tsunami of water just barreling down a river. Not exactly a relaxing day at the beach.
Exactly. But natural features like marshes, meanders, and all that good vegetation act like speed bumps for the water. They slow it down, give it a chance to spread out and soak in, and that reduces that killer peak.
So it's like nature's built-in shock absorbers.
Exactly. But when we come along and screw with those features, we're basically taking the shocks off the car and going for a joyride on a dirt road.
And then we wonder why we end up with a busted-ass suspension.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. So slowing the flow, good. But what about the bigger guns? The big daddy solutions like dams and levees?
Yes. The classic human response, build a bigger wall. Dams and reservoirs, they definitely have their place. They can hold back a shit ton of water, generate power, and even create some pretty nice recreational areas.
Yeah, gotta have those Instagrammable lake views, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
But let's be real here, they can also really screw up ecosystems, displace communities, and sometimes even make flooding worse in certain areas. It's like playing whack-a-mole with nature. You solve one problem, but another one pops up somewhere else.
So it's not as simple as just building bigger and better dams. We've got to think about the whole dam ecosystem.
Exactly. We can't just isolate one part of the system. We need to look at the bigger picture and think about the long-term consequences.
All right, so we've covered the basics, the good, the bad, and the ugly of floods and our attempts to control them. But let's get down to the juicy stuff. What are some real-world examples of flood management gone right or epically wrong? You know, the kind of stuff that makes you want to either build an ark or invest in a scuba diving suit.
Well, there's the Red River Floodway in Winnipeg, Canada. It's this 48-kilometer channel that they built specifically to divert floodwaters around the city. Basically, they created a whole separate river just for emergencies.
So like a bypass for pissed off water?
You got it. And it's been pretty damn effective. Saved Winnipeg from some major floods multiple times. Then you've got the Thames Barrier in London, this massive movable barrier that protects the city from storm surges. Imagine giant steel doors rising up to hold back the tide.
Damn, that's some serious flood fighting tech.
Ugh.
But I bet there have been some colossal screw-ups too.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, we humans are pretty good at that.
Oh, absolutely. The levee failures during Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans are a prime example of what happens when flood management goes tits up. Thousands of people displaced, billions of dollars in damage, and a whole lot of finger-pointing.
Yeah, that was a total shit show. It's like we try to outsmart nature, but she always seems to have a few tricks up her sleeve.
You can say that again? And with climate change intensifying everything, those tricks are getting a lot more dangerous.
Fuck. So it's not just about building bigger walls and hoping to the best. We've got to get a lot smarter and more adaptable if we want to survive this watery mess.
You're starting to get it.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to dive into next time. The future of flood management, where the stakes are higher, the solutions are more complex, and the tequila is flowing freely.
Don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be back in a flash to explore the wild world of flood management in the age of climate change.
All right, so let's wade back into this shitstorm.
Yeah, last time we were talking about how humans are basically playing Jenga with the planet yanking out natural flood defenses and wondering why the whole damn thing starts to wobble.
It's like we're setting ourselves up for failure.
And to make matters worse, climate change is that asshole friend who keeps shaking the table.
Right, so what the hell are we supposed to do? Just throw our hands up and say, fuck it, we're all gonna drown.
I mean, I'm not opposed to a little apocalyptic chaos, but preferably not the watery kind. So what's the plan? How do we outsmart Mother Nature when she's clearly got a few extra aces up her sleeve?
Well, first of all, we gotta stop relying solely on those big, expensive, and often environmentally destructive projects like dams and levees.
You mean those things we spent the last hour praising?
Hey, they have their place. But they're not a silver bullet. We need a more holistic approach.
So would we just let the water have its way, surrender our cities to the fish, and move everyone to higher ground?
Not exactly, but we do need to start thinking about adapting to the water rather than trying to conquer it.
Okay, I'm listening. Give me the lowdown on this whole adaptation thing.
One key strategy is restoring those natural floodplains we talked about. Letting rivers meander, giving the water space to spread out, and reestablishing those natural sponges that soak up the excess flow.
Right, so less concrete jungle, more soggy wetlands.
Mm-hmm.
But what about all the people and buildings already smack dab in flood-prone areas? We can't just relocate entire cities.
True, but we can make those cities more resilient. Think flood-proof buildings, elevated structures, smarter drainage systems, early warning systems, and even things like permeable pavement that lets the water soak through. It's about designing with water in mind, not pretending it doesn't exist.
So it's like prepping for a hurricane party, but on a citywide scale. Stocking up on sandbags, boarding up the windows, and making sure the beer fridge is fully stocked.
Well, maybe minus the beer fridge, but you're getting the idea. It's about proactive planning, not reactive panic.
All right, I'm starting to see the picture.
Yes.
It's not just about brute force engineering. It's about being smarter, more adaptable.
Right.
But let's be real. All of this sounds expensive as hell.
Yeah.
Who's going to foot the bill for this flood-proofing extravaganza?
That's the million-dollar question, literally. But here's the thing. The cost of inaction is far greater. Think about those billion-dollar disaster relief efforts every time a major flood hits. And that's just the immediate damage. You also have to factor in the long-term economic impacts, the displacement of people, the environmental damage, and the emotional toll.
So it's a classic case of pay now or pay later, but with a much bigger price tag later.
Exactly. And with climate change intensifying everything, that later is coming sooner than we think.
Speaking of climate change, how the hell does that fit into this whole equation? Is it just making everything wetter and wilder?
Climate change is like throwing gasoline on an already raging fire. We're seeing more extreme rainfall events, rising sea levels, and shifting weather patterns. All of this is amplifying the risk and severity of flooding worldwide.
So basically all the shit we've been talking about is about to get a whole lot worse.
Pretty much. We're entering uncharted territory here. The floods of the future are going to be unlike anything we've seen before. Imagine Hurricane Katrina on steroids happening more frequently and in more places.
Fuck, that's not exactly a comforting thought. So are we just screwed? Is there anything we can actually do to prepare for this watery dystopia?
Well, first we need to acknowledge the reality of climate change and get serious about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That's the only way to slow down this runaway train.
Yeah, but that's a whole other deep dive we could do. For now, let's focus on what we can do to brace ourselves for these supercharged floods.
We need to get a lot more serious about investing in research and development, exploring innovative solutions, and being willing to adapt our strategies as the climate continues to change. It's not about finding a one-size-fits-all solution. It's about constantly evolving and refining our approaches.
Sounds like we need to channel our inner MacGyver and get creative with our flood-fighting arsenal. Duct tape anyone.
Well, maybe not duct tape, but we definitely need to think outside the box. And that means being willing to challenge those traditional assumptions and embrace new technologies and approaches.
Okay, so we've got the big picture. Climate change is making things worse. Traditional approaches are no longer enough, and we need to get a lot more adaptable and innovative. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What are some practical things that people can actually do in their own lives to prepare for the next big flood?
Well, the first step is understanding your risk. Do you live in a flood-prone area? What are the historical flood patterns in your region? Where are the evacuation routes? Having this information can literally save your life.
So it's like doing your homework before a big exam, except the exam involves potentially losing your home and everything you own.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to natural disasters. Check out resources from your local government, the Red Cross or FEMA. They have tons of information on flood preparedness.
All right, so educate yourself, know your risk, have a plan. What else?
Think about flood insurance. It might seem like an unnecessary expense, but it's worth it if you live in a high-risk area. And don't wait until a storm is brewing to get insurance. You might not be able to get coverage once the shit hits the fan.
Good point. So we got education, risk assessment, a plan, and insurance. Anything else?
Consider making your home more flood-resistant. There are a lot of simple things you can do, like installing flood vents, sealing cracks in your foundation, and elevating your electrical appliances.
So it's not just about big, expensive infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
There are things we can do on a personal level to protect ourselves and our property.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of your own flood risk and being proactive. Don't just wait for the government to save you.
All right, folks, we've thrown a lot of information at you, but here's the bottom line. Floods are a serious threat, and they're only going to get worse. But we're not helpless. By understanding the risks, adapting our strategies, and taking practical steps to prepare, we can weather the storm.
And who knows, maybe we can even turn this whole flood management thing into an opportunity to create more resilient, sustainable, and water-smart communities. It's about turning a challenge into an opportunity.
Now, that's a thought worth pondering. But before we get too philosophical, let's wade into the murky waters of the political and ethical dilemmas surrounding flood management. Because as we all know, where there's water, there's bound to be some bullshit. All right, let's be honest. Dealing with floods is already a royal pain in the ass, but now we got to wade into the swamp of politics and ethics.
Yeah, because figuring out how to stop the planet from drowning wasn't complicated enough. We got to add a layer of human bullshit to the mix.
Fantastic. So on top of trying to outsmart Mother Nature, we got to deal with politicians and activists with their panties in a twist. Just what I needed.
It's part of the package, I'm afraid. Let's take managed retreat, for example.
Managed retreat. That sounds like some kind of fancy military maneuver.
Not quite. The idea is to move people and buildings out of high-risk flood zones. Sounds simple, right?
Less stuff to get wrecked. Fewer lives at stake. I get it.
But try telling that to someone who's lived in their home for generations.
Good luck convincing Grandma to abandon her house and her memories because some scientist drew a line on a map and said, sorry, you're in the splash zone now.
Exactly. It becomes a whole tangled mess of property rights, emotional attachments, and economic disparities. Who gets to decide who stays and who goes? And who pays for the relocation?
Because you can bet your ass the people with the deepest pockets will find a way to stay high and dry, while those who can't afford to move are left to fend for themselves.
It's a recipe for social unrest and a whole lot of pissed off people, and probably a few lawyers getting rich off the whole mess.
Sounds about right. So what's the solution?
There isn't one easy answer. It's a complex issue that requires careful consideration of all the stakeholders involved. And it's not just about managed retreat. Think about floodplain restoration. Sounds great in theory. Give the river more space, let nature do its thing.
Yeah, but that often means deliberately flooding certain areas, right? Farmland, maybe even entire communities to protect others.
Exactly. And that raises some serious ethical questions about environmental justice. Who bears the brunt of these decisions? Is it always the most vulnerable communities, the poor, the marginalized, the ones with the least political clout who end up getting screwed?
It wouldn't surprise me. It seems like whenever there's a disaster, it's always the people who can least afford it who get hit the hardest.
It's a pattern that repeats itself over and over. And it highlights the need for equitable and ethical solutions in flood management. We can't just focus on the technical aspects we have to consider the social and economic impacts as well.
So it's not just about building bigger dams or drawing lines on a map. It's about figuring out how to share the burden, protect the most vulnerable, and make sure everyone has a voice in the process.
You're getting it. And that requires a shift in mindset. We need to stop seeing water as the enemy and start thinking of it as a valuable resource that needs to be managed collaboratively and sustainably.
Okay, I'm seeing the bigger picture here. It's not just about engineering. It's about ethics, equity, and finding solutions that work for both people and the planet. But let's be real. Climate change is throwing a whole new wrench into the works. How the hell do we balance all these competing interests when the stakes are getting higher every year?
That's the million-dollar question, and there's no easy answer. But I think the key is to start having these difficult conversations now, before it's too late. We need to break down the silos between scientists, engineers, policymakers, and communities and work together to find solutions that are both practical and just.
Sounds like a tall order, but I guess we don't have much choice, do we? Either we figure this shit out, or we're all going to be up to our asses in water.
The future of flood management is about more than just building walls and diverting rivers. It's about fostering collaboration, embracing innovation, and making sure that everyone has a chance to stay afloat in a world that's getting increasingly unpredictable.
Well, folks, there you have it. The not-so-pretty truth about flood management. It's messy, complicated, and involves a whole lot more than just sandbags and engineering feats. It's about people, politics, and the ethical choices we make in the face of a changing planet.
And it's a challenge that's only going to get more urgent in the years to come. So next time you see a flood on the news, remember this conversation. There's a lot more going on beneath the surface than meets the eye.
All right, you waterlogged bastards. That's a wrap on this deep dive into flood management. We've explored the science, the solutions, the political bullshit, and the ethical dilemmas that come with trying to keep our heads above water.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We sure as hell have. And we hope you learned a thing or two and maybe even got a little fired up along the way.
Remember, knowledge is power. And in a world facing increasingly frequent and intense flooding, that power might just save your ass one day.
So stay dry, stay informed, and stay the fuck out of flood zones if you know it's good for you. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.